Hi and welcome to Consultants Corner. In today's new era, where collaboration and partnership is becoming more prevalent and important, it is our belief that an open narrative and sharing of ideas is vital. The industry possesses some really exceptional operators, consultants, and contractors, and our aim is to bring greater insights which often can lie hidden away. I'm Maxine Crowe, your host, and I am delighted today to be joined on our first episode by Charles Manners from Turpin Smale Catering Consultants. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it, Charles? I managed to get that out. How are you?
Very well indeed, and thank you for the introduction, and very good to meet you online.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I hope that at some point there's going to be an event where we can actually meet in person. So,
Definitely.
Charles, I have some questions for you today, and for our audience that are listening, I really hope that you enjoy our episodes that we have coming up as well. However, Charles, the floor is all yours, so I'm going to jump right in. Please tell us about yourself and your career.
Okay. Well, thank you, Maxine. I was a soldier for 4 years and left there and went into Whitbread. And Whitbread was a very different company then to what it is now. Now it's just bedrooms and a few pubs, but it then brewed beer. And I started off on the pub side, went on to the restaurant side, and then finished up in hotels and working for Marriott Hotels and then running their F&B operations. It was a great learning base, and those skills have sort of stood me in good stead ever since. I then went into consultancy 20 years ago. I've been with Turpin Smale now for 15 years, and been working with Chris Brown and Ian Doughty, and before that Peter Smale. We're a small, compact catering consultancy, and we stick to pure catering consultancy. We don't do design. Yes, and so that, for me, myself, I love the countryside. I enjoy adventure holidays. I'm just literally packing, and we go to Saturday morning to Mongolia. So it's going to be quite a random place to go, but it should be quite exciting.
And very hot.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. So, what are the highlights of your role as a consultant?
I think the highlight that I find is seeing something from start to fruition. And probably the best examples of that are when you do feasibility studies and you sort of plan the number of catering outlets, you work with the visitor experience consultants, and you help develop the overall business plan and the catering footprint, and you see it from literally the embryonic stage right the way through to it actually opening. And you may contract it out at that point, or they may run it in-house, and that really, and seeing it through. So that is incredibly refreshing. I mean, from a tendering point of view, which is about 50% of our business, having a tender that goes well, we match the right contractor with the client, and seeing that contract go on and build and develop is incredibly satisfying also.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are a number of where it is very good.
So, on the flip side of that, Charles, what do you find are the challenges and how do you address them?
Well, the first challenge we have as a consultancy is, although the caterers might wonder when we run tenders, we actually have to win business too, and we are competing against all the other consultants, and it's a pretty competitive world. And so that's definitely, and so in order to do that, you need to have clear determination, and above all else, it's about delivering the brief and taking the clients one step further from where they are. Taking them from good to great is a great way of doing it. And I mean, the other part is that we work, and what I find interesting is fascinating is the range of businesses we work in. We work in small museums that are operating in-house. They simply couldn't. There's not enough profit in there for a contractor. A contractor probably isn't interested in the business. to the large museums where there's quite a lot of layers of management and communication.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's understanding those organizations, it's understanding what makes them tick, and they're all very different. The DNA of those businesses, one really needs to understand what they are. So the challenge, therefore, is if you can understand the client, you can understand what they're needing, and then sometimes you have to sort of alter the brief halfway through and do that in a diplomatic way. I'm not saying we get that right or I get that right all the time, but you need to adapt the brief and change, and then and gain support of that as you go through, because quite often the client's brief is probably, it's written at a point in time, but that may change over the period of the contract.
So flexibility is quite key in that
Absolutely
instance, isn't it?
Absolutely key. Absolutely key.
Yeah. So what do you consider to be future trends in the industry, and how do you feel we can prepare for change?
Well, prepare for change. I mean, I was always remember somebody saying to me at a presentation, the only time you like change as an individual, as a human, is when your nappy's changed by your mother. And none of us intrinsically, we may say we like change, but we are very cautious as the human race generally. There are a few people out there who really aren't that. I agree. But change, I mean, it's an interesting one. The world has been changing all the time ever since I've been working and ever since I've been at school. I think with AI, I think we're on the cusp of something very, very different to where we've been. And it's way beyond me where this is going to go. But I think for our children and grandchildren, it will have huge implications. But initially, if you look at just AI and the way that it's actually potentially impacting hospitality on removing staff at the front line and in automatic checkout, that is all starting to happen, and there's a revolution happening there. And it's partly driven by the cost of labor, which is going up inexorably. And that's a good thing. I mean, the minimum wage going up 10% this year was a good thing. Absolutely no question.
Absolutely.
But it's putting huge pressure on frontline operators. And then moving on to the living wage is also adding pressure. And that's absolutely the right thing to do. But conversely, it means that the immediate need is to try and reduce staffing. And if you can do that through technology, either through checkout, or you do it through ordering at the table, or this technology and the back of house technology is going to transform the way we work. I mean, it is happening slowly. When I say slowly, I mean COVID has been an accelerator, undoubtedly, for this technology. And I think it will just grow and grow. From a consultant's point of view, it's just so important to try and stay ahead of it in terms of knowledge, and to understand, to know where it's working, who's using it, where it's not working. And so that is the challenge from a consultancy. We're not IT consultants, so we're never going to be at the forefront of this technology, but we need to understand how it works and what the application is. And the caterers are embracing this. I mean, there's absolutely no question. Partly because I think finding staff is just incredibly difficult. I mean, there isn't a sector where staffing isn't the challenge at the moment. And
that's true.
And so that's, there are lots of different pressure points on this, but it will make a huge difference. I mean, I think from a sector point of view, I think there's some really interesting things that are happening in terms of trends. I think, the Americans buying OVG, buying rhubarb and Bovingdons, I think is probably the most interesting aspect from the contract catering world for some time. I mean, OVG they're major players in the stadia world in the States, and then ASM Global, similar style operator, also buying CGC up in a couple of years ago up in Yorkshire. So we've suddenly now got we had Delaware who bought into Wembley, but they've never really sort of expanded. But these guys, listening to them, they are definitely on a mission to expand and expand rapidly, and that will give the UK operators, contract caterers, a good run for the money, and they will be adopting technology. And Stadia is probably the one area where technology is probably being trialed. That and workplace catering would be the two areas that I'd highlight. And then in terms of the other trend, I think that I'm seeing from a sort of client's point of view is on tenders. I think probably 5-10 years ago, we were encouraged people to go on site visits to look at what the other contracts were out there. We were looking for people to look at reference sites. Now that is absolutely, people really want to visit. They really want to meet the other clients' representatives to understand how good the contractors are, warts and all. Google and TripAdvisor give you instant feedback on visitor attractions, as an example, on knowing how good the food is. Whereas 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you really didn't have that sort of customer data at your fingertips. So it's a combination of trends that I would sort of highlight. I think it's undoubtedly technology in some shape or form is key. But it won't ever take away from some of the personal service that people want, and they want an experience. And if you're going to deliver an experience to a human, you probably need a human at some point in that experience.
I was going to say you can't completely replace the human element. No. People love people, and they love to feel that warmth and that really good.
Absolutely,
someone's paying attention and looking after me. That's so true. Some great insights from you there, Charles. Can you?
I struggle, Maxine, on that. I struggle sometimes when I rarely go to a really smart hotel. And I do, and I'm sort of faced with an automatic check-in. That just doesn't do it for me. I mean, if I'm paying quite a few £100 a night, I actually want to see somebody at the check-in.
I agree.
And that's a sort of example where I think you've got to be very careful as an operator. You don't push this too far.
It's about a balance, isn't it? Really, getting that right balance.
Yeah,
that's brilliant insights from you, Charles. Can you give our audience your top 3 recipes for success with working with your clients, caterers, and if you have the opportunity to work with other consultants?
Well, we certainly work with other consultants. We work with design consultants. We work with visitor retail consultants. We work with visitor attraction business planning consultants. So we work as and sort of composite teams often, particularly doing feasibility studies. I mean, these are probably very glib answers, but I mean, they're still relevant, actually, I think. One is listening. You've got to listen to really understand. And, we start, when I say listening, when we get a brief from a client, we really look at the brief, what they've actually put down, and try and answer that. Because it's so easy not to even answer on a proposal what the client actually is asking for. So we double check that we're trying to answer the brief, and fully it goes back to the DNA point. The other part is fairness, particularly when dealing with contractors, because there's only one winner when you're doing a tender. And I mean, my perception is that the caterers post-COVID are being a lot more choosy as to what business they do tender for. And so our job is to get the contractors to the start line. And I think you've got to, if you're going to run a tender, you've got to demonstrate that it is going to be an open and fair tender process. And by the history of how you've treated them, that's the contractors in the past, will bear heavily, I think, on how they interact and the client that they might take on. And then the third one is trying to remain objective, in terms of one's advice, and base that advice on experience. I mean, I think one of Keith, one of the elements that I enjoy most about this whole role is there's very often there isn't a right answer. If there was an easy answer, they wouldn't be asking us for our opinion.
That's true.
So they would do it, and so I mean the other part on that is that we've got a lot of the clients are very, very much more experienced than they ever were on catering. So I think you've got to remain objective. You've got to use your experience and recommend the best solution, and accept that there may well be a different answer on that. Whether it's the size of a restaurant, whether it's the different contractor, whether you're looking at people. So there's lots of variations. What you hope is in the whole, you get the right answer.
That's brilliant, and thank you for those top tips. Sometimes it's the simplest of things that people often think, oh my God, we've got to go really complex and technical, but it's bringing it back to those really simple, basic practices, isn't it?
Well, I mean, catering is not a complex business. It is about great food and great service, and somehow delivering it in the volume that you want to do. It's not complex. It is lots of moving parts, and it's people who are the key element within it.
Thank you. So a couple more questions for you, Charles. How would you like to see the sector evolve and change?
When you say the sector, what are you referring to?
As in, like it could be the hospitality, catering as a sector.
And I think I mentioned earlier that the clients that we're dealing with now are undoubtedly more knowledgeable about catering. A number of them have run tenders in the past, and sometimes they think that they can do it, and they probably can do it perfectly well. And they don't need. So we're finding that from a tendering point of view, we're probably doing what I call more critical friend work, where we're not necessarily being involved in the whole tender. We're not involved in organizing absolutely the minutiest details. We do that, but not always. But we come in at the critical junctures where the specification's been agreed, the scoring's been agreed, the type of or the list of caterers, and then the final decision. So it's probably from our perspective less process driven, but that can be done by the procurement team, and they're very good and probably more adept at than we are. I mean, the other thing that I think that the way the sector is going to go, or is thinking, is on the whole role of concession agreements and where they lead. I've been party to a number of profit share agreements and partnerships, partially driven through COVID, because the contractors weren't willing to enter into a concession agreement at that particular time because the world was so uncertain. So they went into profit shares. Now, some have worked, some haven't. Some contractors understand profit shares and are very good at managing them. Others don't want to go near it. But there's no doubt about it that profit shares, if they're set up correctly and the right people and the involved, and the will is there, they do create a different set of behaviours to a straightforward concession agreement. And they create a much more of a partnership agreement. It is probably fair to say that I've seen them work probably better in larger contracts than smaller contracts. But that's just the way it's gone so far. I'm quite interested in the way that those partnerships develop.
It's definitely a space to watch. Just moving on now to some hot topics in industry and also in facilities management procurement. The hot topic around its sustainability. So, how important is sustainability truly today?
Well, that's I mean, who's it important for? Is it important? It's definitely important for the clients because they've got their ESG agendas and they are very keen to tick as many boxes on this front as possible. How interested are some of the visitors that I see at attractions and the stately homes and the students, I'm not totally convinced it's absolutely as high on their agenda as it might be. There is no doubt that everybody has a role in educating and helping people on this journey. So the caterers, I mean, they are using this whole sustainability agenda to differentiate themselves. And as a result, they are all doing extremely good work. I mean, they're all doing it slightly differently, but I have to say, sometimes you can't put a cigarette paper between one contractor's proposal on sustainability versus another. They're doing great work. And there is a cost involved in doing some of it too, particularly when you're sort of removing plastic. But that's the way the world's going, and they're providing and finding solutions. So I would say, in summary, the clients, the sector are very keen on it. It's very, very important. It's very high up people's agenda. I think the end user has a journey to make on this whole area.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're down to our last question, and then I'd love to get any other insights from you. So final question. What advice would you give to new players entering the profession?
What advice would I give? I would probably suggest that you focus on a small number of sectors, because you can't do everything. And we've focused as a business on certain sectors, and we've left other sectors. We don't do any schoolwork, as an example. And there's a lot of consultants out there who do an extremely good job on schools, but and we've done a little bit of health work, but we haven't done a great deal of that either. So I would suggest to somebody starting on this journey to sort of focus, use your experience, use where you've come from, and network your way through that sector, associations, think tank, presentations, conferences, whatever. But that's probably the key advice. So go clear focus and go as deep within that sector as possible. That's where I would start.
Charles, it's been absolutely amazing speaking and learning more about yourself and Turpin Smale today. Last words from you in terms of any words of wisdom or anything else you'd love to share with the audience?
Well, I mean, I think it's a fascinating process that you've embarked on, and well done you for doing it, and well done for Chris and Izzy for sort of sponsoring it. The more we can do as a group of consultants to explain what we do and the value we add to clients who may be thinking, do I need a consultant? Can I do this without? The better. Because undoubtedly, going back to my previous point, there's a lot of knowledge out there on how to run tenders, how to plan catering, and there are a lot of people who say they can do catering, and they do a lot of other things amongst it, and we see the results of that, and it is not as good as the work that I see my competitors doing or we do. So it comes back to my point about focus. So the more we can do to explain what we do and the value that we deliver, the better, because it'll actually do the whole sector a lot of good.
Thank you, Charles.
Well, thank you.
You are more than welcome. So to our audience, thank you all for listening. And Charles, if anyone wants to contact you and get hold of you, how can they do that?
Our website, Turpin Smale Catering, or my email address is charles.manners@turpinsmale.co.uk.
Thank you so much.
I'd love to hear from anybody.
Okay, that's great. So this has been Consultants Corner, and the end of our actual official launch and first episode. We're here creating better understanding and insight and changing the industry narrative. Thanks everyone for listening. Take care. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you for including me.